Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Talks because every word matters. I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. In light of the recent mass protests in Serbia following the tragic collapse of the Novi Sad railway station canopy, which resulted in 15 fatalities, we have the opportunity to speak with one of the professors actively participating in these demonstrations. Filip Ejdus, professor at the Faculty of Political Sciences at the University of Belgrade, joins me now to give us his first-hand experience on what is currently happening in Serbia and how could the situation potentially affect the country in the long run. Good morning, and thank you for joining me here on the program.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
So can you share what personally motivated you to take part in these protests and what is happening in Serbia as of now?
Of course. So for the past 12 years, we've lived in a country backsliding, both in terms of its democracy and rule of law. We've lived in a country where corruption has become really endemic and where culture of impunity for those in power really unbearable. The fall of the canopy in Novi Sad, killing 15, was actually the last straw which broke the camel's back, to say plainly. It brought home the realization that corruption kills. Also, the fall of the canopy generated a great deal of anxiety that this material infrastructure around us, which is built through corruption and incompetence, is insecure, and that another falling, roof is lurking around the corner. So finally, it was also a wake-up call for all of us that we should collectively do something, or the entire society will collapse.
As a professor, for your students and for people surrounding you, you're definitely a symbol of sorts, I would say. How do you perceive your role in those protests, and what's your unique perspective on what's happening and how, for example, the students, the next generation, is responding to whatever's happening in the country?
My role is double-hatted. As a professor, of course, I'm proud of my students. I support them. We show solidarity. We're also super happy and proud to see that our students, the younger generation, have internalized some of the norms and the values which are part and parcel of the education process, especially in social sciences and in politics. But as a member of ProGlass, which is a civic initiative that was established last year, I take active part in actually mobilizing different sectors of our society to be more active in the democratization process. As a matter of fact, the student movement, the latest kind of phase in the student movement, evolved out of the 15 minutes vigils that we started in late November to honor the dead in Novi Sad. These vigils, attended by the students, were met with violence by pro-regime thugs. And following this incident in late November, students announced that they will blockade the universities and that they will start this massive mobilization. In this capacity, I see my role being in synergy with theirs.
And how would you assess the government's response to the protests so far? What is your assessment thereof?
Sure. Well, the government response since the outset of this crisis has been a mixture of denial, violence, intimidation, and dishonest concessions. One day they would send thugs to attack students, to run them over with cars, or to beat them with baseball bats. The other one, they would invite them for a dialogue. Then the regime would portray the students as stooges of the Western intelligence agencies, as spies, as traitors, only to offer them cheap housing loans the day after. So whatever they did over the past 3 months has only added fuel to fire, enraged the students, and increased the support that they get from the rest of society.
Do you think that those protests and this joint effort by the society, by the community, by Serbians, has the potential of actually making a change or possibly even overturning the structure, the governmental structure as we know it today?
Of course, at the moment, the regime is showing, serious signs of weaknesses. The Prime Minister Vučević resigned the other day, but students actually are much more ambitious. They don't want to have this regime change. They want the entire political system changed. They want to live in the rule of law, where they want to live in democracy. They want to live in pluralism. They want to live in a genuinely, qualitatively different society. They don't want just to replace one hybrid regime with another. So this is why their goals and their visions are much more far-reaching than simply replacing whoever is in power right now in Serbia.
How does it feel? It might seem like a more of a personal question. How does it feel to know that you are helping these young generations, these young people at your university who are joining these initiatives to become a part of the greater tomorrow, of people, of becoming a group that is eventually going to be responsible for the shape of the country? How does it feel?
Well, look, we are all extremely hopeful and happy to see that the new generations have not lost their hopes and their ambitions for better life and for more democracy in Serbia. I belong to a generation which saw protests in 1990s against Slobodan Milosevic. We already lived through, the first democratic reforms in the early 2000s, which were unfortunately not entirely successful and complete. We had reversal and the return to power of powers and forces of the 1990s, of nationalism, of authoritarianism. And my generation, to a large extent, became disillusioned and in a way lost hopes. But now that we see that the new generation, the youngsters, the students, the high school pupils have not given up on those ideals that actually made us tick when we were young, are actually restoring the hope in my generation. That's why people like me are in full support of the students. People are crying out of happiness meeting them in Novi Sad when they march from Belgrade to Novi Sad. And we are really, really hopeful that this second chance will not be missed.
This is definitely incredibly uplifting to hear that, to see that people have this hope, especially now that things are in motion. I wanted to go back to the recent resignation of Prime Minister Miloš Vučević. Do you view this as a sufficient step towards addressing the protesters' concerns, or is it just a transitional thing and more has to happen within days and weeks to come?
Sure. Well, his resignation is a sign that the regime finally takes the student protest seriously. However, several things should be taken into consideration. First, students have 4 requests, and the resignation of the prime minister is not one of them. Second, despite his constitutional role as the head of the executive, the prime minister is actually not the most powerful person in the country. It's President Vučić who actually usurped illegally all the competences in this country. Third, Vučević's resignation will probably lead to another round of rigged snap elections. We've had several extremely problematic elections in the recent past, in December and then again in June. European Parliament issued a resolution clearly indicating all the problems OSCE, ODIHR, all international bodies have noted. And we are afraid that this might only going to end up in another round of rigged elections, which will be won by the incumbent. In sum, the resignation indicates that the regime is ready to make big sacrifices to put down the student rebellion. However, for students, this was too little and too late.
What do you think is the solution to make sure that those elections won't be rigged? Is there any sort of an action that can be taken as of now to make sure it's being avoided?
Yes, first of all, we need to have a serious and honest process of fulfilling the ODIHR recommendations. Also, this process needs to involve also the members of the opposition and civil society and experts. And finally, some degree of involvement of the international community is also necessary here. I think that the European Union should also play a role. Serbia is a candidate for membership in the European Union. And the European Union, all of the values and the norms which are driving this process are quintessentially essentially what the European Union is all about. It's democracy, it's the rule of law, it's transparency, it's all those values which are built into the very kind of character of the European Union. And I think that the EU should also take these protests seriously and help Serbia's democracy stand on its feet. So some form of transitory or expert government is currently probably the only way to go, which will, this government should be mandated to prepare the society, to prepare the state for free and fair elections, and then we can move on.
So we've seen protests, ongoing protests. What happens in the near future? And are there more protests going to take place? Is it going to spread further onto some, for example, public institutions? What's next on the agenda?
Literally every day, protests are taking place in unprecedented number of cities and places. According to, an anecdote, even villages which did not stand against the Ottoman Empire saw protests against this regime. And as we speak, protests of professors and researchers at universities and research institutes in Serbia is going to take place in half an hour in downtown Belgrade. The protest of professors who have solidarity with students. So literally on a daily basis, we have protests everywhere. And one of the things which might happen in the days ahead is the general strike. We already had one attempt at the general strike, which was semi-successful. And I'm afraid this situation is leading us to another total halt and a general strike, which hopefully will make this government, introduce some serious changes, fulfill student demands, and find a solution to this deep and deepening political crisis.
And we hope the solutions will be found, but it seems to be the case that winds of change are shaking up Serbia. Thank you so much, Filip Ejdus, professor at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Belgrade. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for this invitation.
And so this would be all for now here on World Talks, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.